Sebastian, it's preface for everyone. I've been trying to get you on my podcast for so long, and
I'm really bad at communicating. Not communicating. I'm really bad at. Yeah, I guess I am bad at communicating through social media.
I'm terrible. I'm a hypocrite. I'm terrible. I can't. It wasn't until I started a podcast that I actually started actively communicating.
Well, I didn't used to be so transparent about. I mean, until like a year ago, I didn't tell people that I was like, oh, I have a lot of issues with this hand.
Yeah.
So I felt like, you don't like telling people your weaknesses. You're like, oh yeah. But now I'm like, I had to grow up. I'm like, listen, just working with my disability people at my school and stuff like that. I had to be like, oh, I'll die if I don't speak about this. So I'm like. So a lot of it's just like I use voice messaging a lot.
Yeah.
And so like I have like 87 unread text messages, and then that's not email. That's just text messages. Not even emails.
Yeah. No,
DMs, Facebook, all that shit. I can't. I'm a full time.
Yeah. For everyone listening that isn't watching, has no idea what we're talking about. Why don't you introduce yourself? I know you as Havoc Sebastian on Instagram, and I'll link that in the description in the top comment. But yeah, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Sebastian Gallegos. I'm a full-time student at my school. I don't know if I'm supposed to.
You can say whatever.
Whatever
you want, man.
I'm a finance major. I'm a junior. I was in the Marine Corps. I got out as a rifle team leader, a corporal. I served predominantly with 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. I was wounded in combat in Helmand Province, Afghanistan.
And you have the coolest prosthetic arm.
Yeah,
I've
I know,
ever
my
seen.
baby. It's kind of like it's kind of been like a learning process for me with prosthetics, because I never realized. I was so ignorant. Obviously, everybody's ignorant about prosthetics until it's incumbent upon them to not be.
Yeah.
And so I didn't realize I was going to have to be such an advocate for prosthetics. When I was wounded, I kind of grew up on prosthetics, so I never knew an opportunity. I never had like a world where there wasn't going to be one, because like even when I was in the hospital, they're like, you're going to get a robotic arm. And then I kind of like was very naive about what role I was going to play in getting that. I just kind of assumed everybody else was always smarter than me in the room when it came to prosthetics.
Yeah.
And then years of like a lot of difficulties where now I had to learn to be like, oh man, I need to like fucking understand physics, engineering. I was like, oh, I have to be like really loud about this.
Yeah.
And this prosthetic was meant to be a temporary thing, because it was the first. I'm getting better about talk, so it seems like I'm giving an elevator speech.
No, man.
Better recently.
There's no rules here, man. Say whatever you want.
Yeah, this was meant to be a temporary thing. This was the first to give people why this is not a good prosthetic build is because it was the first upper extremity prosthetic that the VA in San Antonio, Audie Murphy, had ever built. Okay. And I never fully explained that to people because I can't type it out. Like I like all the grammar and all that stuff. Like I voice messaging. Yeah. And I'm like, okay. To explain, they didn't want to build it first. Audie Murphy didn't want to build my prosthetic. But I had so many failed prosthetics since I was wounded. I had a really good prosthetist whenever I first got wounded. He was the best in the world. Mm-hmm. People from all over the world came to see him. There's this hospital in San Antonio called the Center for the Intrepid, built specifically by civilians. Over 600,000 civilians donated their money to build this critical care center for combat wounded people. And he built me some really good prosthetics, and I always thought that it would always be at that level, like the level of I had camouflage prosthetic that a lot of people knew me for. I always said the arm is more famous than me because people knew it from everywhere, and I don't know. I feel like now, because I've been getting more into just being loud, I always, because I was like, oh man, I'm kind of forced in position because I can't hide my service, and so like everywhere I go, I kind of get a lot of people that like project things onto me, and I'm like, I in person, it's not where I can't avoid it. Yeah. And it's almost easier now during the quarantine because people have to stay 6 feet away. Yeah. But like I think people don't realize that like my online personality came from how much in person like I was harassed. You know what I mean? Like,
Okay.
And dating different girls and stuff like that. And my friends, they would realize they wouldn't really understand the scope of things until they hung out with me, and they're like, "Oh, you get harassed everywhere you go," and it's like super positive interactions to super negative interactions. You know what I mean? Like,
but it's still
where people can like
they're all
escalate
stressful.
situations.
Yeah. Okay.
You know,
even positive interactions, that's still stressful, right?
Well, it's stressful because they don't know what they're asking.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so part of my problem is that I've always been real subtle. You know what I mean? Like, my boys who know what I went through. So I used to like take thank yous and stuff like that on behalf of my bros.
Okay.
But then like I talk to my bros about it, and I'm like, man, they're more protective of me than even I am. You know what I mean? They're like, oh, they would get like, whenever I hang out with them, they would get madder at people for being the way they are with me than me.
Yeah.
And so now, like, I learned to, if people don't know anything about heuristics and stuff like that, where it's like just profiling people's mannerisms, stuff like that, I learned to pick up on whether people are going to be confrontational fast or not.
Okay.
And so, like, I feel like I always have to be like, I have to give them the worst case scenarios, because in person, people always have this conception that it's like they're the first person to, ask me, or, and so you kind of pick up like the thank you is usually it's like a thank you, so they can be more invasive, so they can like get a series of questions. And I'm like, and what people like don't understand is like, that's them bringing up the worst day of my life every day for the rest of my life. And a lot of people don't know that. Like,
no, I never thought about that. Yeah, I'm thinking like, here I am looking at you, and I've had on guys from Delta Force, I've had on comedians, I've had on weightlifters, and everyone in between, nuclear physicists, guys that are 60 years older than me. And I've been following you since before I started my podcast. I've been following yours. Not to go on a little spiel, but I lost a sibling to suicide in 2014, and always felt bad for myself. Was in great shape, got into med school, and seemingly kind of went all by the wayside when I lost my brother. And I started following your page because for me it was like how to overcome difficulties. So whereas it's a given, it's thank you for your service, wow, this guy's badass. To me it was also like, here's this guy that's just like, I'm bitching and moaning, I lost a brother, this is so sad. And there you are doing push-ups out in the sun, and it's just like, work hard every day. And it's just, that's why I started following you. And I'm realizing as I say this now that I probably should have clarified that when I was trying to get you on my podcast. It wasn't just, hey, show me your arm. Like, dude, I get it. Like, it's the worst day of your fucking life. You don't want to talk about it.
It's and I feel like now I kind of like, as an amputee, I learned from the disability community. I'm like, you're kind of forced to be transparent if you want, because I want prosthetics to evolve in my life.
Yes.
And that's where we were kind of like in a different place. Me and my prosthetist, they're like, one day prosthetics are going to be great. And I was like, I was in my 20s at the time. I'm like, what the fuck? I want to live a little bit longer. Yeah. Like, where they were just talking about things.
One day.
Be available one day. And I'm like, I need these, for me, I feel like I came to a point where I'm like, I used to be, at one time, I would consider myself, and people considered me in the medical community, the most advanced upper extremity prosthetic user in the world. And so, like, when people would say, so sometimes, like, I kind of assume people know things, and I try to be subtle about things, and opportunities that I had and didn't have, and things I said no to. And so now, I'm to the point where I'm like, I can communicate about it, where I'm like, because I want people to be like, my prosthetists are relatively young, and that's not to be ageist or anything like that, but the people that kind of like gave up on how advanced prosthetics could be, the capacity for prosthetics at this current, in 2020,
sure,
where I was like, this should be capable of more right now. You know what I mean? Because every day I don't have a prosthetic, I'm more disabled.
Yeah.
And then it's because I don't go off of like telling my story. So people don't understand that I was in the infantry. and that I had so many injuries before I was wounded. And they're like, so I was like, when I'm talking to my bros, I'm like, and my bros are disabled just from their life in the military.
Yeah.
Of, like I have so many mountains from all over the world, all in my body before I was wounded. You know? And they don't get that. And I was like, oh, my hand was fucked before I was wounded. And then I was like, people, I always have to explain it. I was like, now I'm like, I took a piece of shrapnel to my ulnar whenever I was wounded. Yeah. So I never had full control of my both hands since I was wounded. Okay. And now it's like the injuries are so advanced where I'm like, I have to be like, now it's like, if I can't do this or tell people this or whatever, it's because I'm like, oh, because I'm very limited in what I can do in a day now. Yeah. And so like now I'm to the point where I'm like, I'm working specifically just for my right side to get stronger because I can't use this side. Mm-hmm. So people will be like, oh, you look like you're like really work off. That's like, I don't work out this side. I work out this side, and this one comes along. Yeah. Because I got to the point before I started doing the push-up thing. That was because of a Vietnam veteran from here in San Antonio, First Sergeant Casada. He asked me to do it, and I told him, I was like, man, you know how many fucking people ask me? I was like, no, you understand I have one arm? But this guy was wounded in combat. Yeah. And he's a member of Military Order of the Purple Heart in San Antonio. And I was like, Vietnam veterans have always been there for me. Mm-hmm. And, I don't even like explaining, but I was like, my dad was drafted. And I was like, people have to understand like where I got my views from. I was like, oh, my dad was drafted. My dad picked cotton for America as a kid and, picked strawberries, and he worked in the fields as a kid. And then he was drafted into Vietnam. And I always had that like sense of like, it made me mad. That people I'm from the Valley. I'm from South Texas. I'm right on the border. I grew up between Valley and South Texas and Houston because my parents were divorced, but I was born in San Antonio. Mm-hmm. And so like before the push-ups thing, I had only worked my arm every 2 weeks. Okay. My left arm. And, so people maybe thought that I was like, where I am in the disability community, now I feel like I can be more honest because I was like, I made a point where I'm like, oh man, I have to be louder because there's so many puppets being so loud. Yeah. And I'm dealing with their views. And where I'm like, I'm being more transparent, where I'm like, I'm not taking steroids and I'm not taking HGH. And in the disability community, there's like not on like the intellectual side. On the intellectual side, there's like people that are like, hey, inspiration porn and all that stuff is like, that's really bad for kids' health. Okay. And I'm like, now I feel like because I've been able to be like, listen, I don't need a sponsor. I'm sponsored by the GI Bill. Yeah. I can be more vocal where I'm like, listen, all these loud people in the disability community or whatever, I was like, a lot of them like on TV shows and movies, they have their crowns because I didn't want it because I said no to producers, I said no to directors. Yeah. And it makes me mad because I'm like, should I have said yes, to these things where I'm like, maybe they have louder voices, but I was like, yeah, I before I started school, there was a time where I would get 3 movie offers and 3 TV shows every 6 months. And I was like, nope. I would only do something if it would challenge me physically, mm-hmm. which, I don't know if that was the right choice. But I advanced prosthetics a lot. I feel like I advanced prosthetics a lot. Yeah. Or it helped me help my brothers. Okay. So if there's something that I could be like make a network and I'm like, hey, can I get you guys to take my bros, like combat better, for my unit Marines. If I can get them on something, fuck, I'll do that. I don't care. Yeah. And so that's where I was like, I could be more honest now. When I'm like, a lot of people, and this is not to say anything against steroid use or anything like that, because I'm like, I'm not saying I'm not holier than thou or whatever, because if I'm for ending the war on drugs and stuff like that, absolutely, honest about things. So I'm like, I just whenever I'm talking about things where I'm like, listen, if I'm talking about war in the war on drugs and stuff like that, specifically, not to get on a tangent, but just to communicate that one point where I'm like, I think that there's a lot of like law enforcement on steroids, and absolutely. I'm like, they don't view that. No, because they're my friends. Yeah. And I'm like, I'm saying this from a point where I'm like, they understand the hypocrisy of enforcing certain things. Where I'm like, I see a lot of motherfuckers judging like hardcore about drugs and stuff, like hardcore conservatives. I'm like, bitch, do I know how much cleanse train you are on right now? Yeah.
You're
talking about
having a glass of wine. They're like, man, we got to get rid of drugs, and it's like, bitch. That is semantics. When people say drugs and alcohol, it's all drugs. One is just in a bottle. It's
so like I'm so happy that, especially from like the special forces community, there's always been like a lot of from like the websites, like the news websites, like OFA Nation and stuff like that.
Okay.
But now there's like SEALs and Rangers into like CBD and stuff like that, and they understand that it's not about them necessarily completely too much. They're also being vocal about, people that records need to be expunged because like you're making millionaires when people are still in prison.
Yeah, for weed,
for things like that.
And
so, but shit. To get on that thing about the disability, I was like, I get upset. Not get upset, but I'm like, it makes me upset because I get a lot of the people like, why can't you do this? Why can't you do that? Like, why is your hand like this or whatever? I was like, first of all, a lot of the people that you see doing these miraculous things are on steroids, and that's okay because they're my friends or whatever. So whenever I say I feel like I'm the most advanced prosthetic user in the world, and for a prosthetic user, I would put myself against any Paralympian in the world because I know Paralympians are tested. And so I'm like, I was like, don't compare me to these, why I'm not this or that. I always say, if people had a grasp of all the things that I said no to, I was like, just because people put public speaker in their bio does not mean that they're smarter. No. Does not mean that they're offered more opportunities to speak. That means that's what they pursue to do for a living.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean that like everywhere I go, obviously I get asked to speak, and I'm like, does this advance me, or does it advance anything, or who am I speaking to? If I'm just speaking to a bunch of wealthy people that want to be, I'm not attracted to
They want to pat themselves on the back. We talked to a Marine with a prosthetic arm. They're all jerking each other off. They're like, we're so enlightened. We're so progressive. Fuck that.
It's hard because like, it's hard because it seems like I became more accepted by like the Latino amputee community because my first language was Spanish.
Okay.
And I forget to tell people that like mi primer idioma era español. And so I didn't learn English until I was like, I got held back a grade because I didn't speak English until I was like in the first or second grade. And they wanted to hold me back a grade, but they wouldn't. My parents were like, he just doesn't speak English. He'll come along. Yeah. And then I graduated high school when I was 16, so I was able to make the jump.
Well, I was gonna say, because I asked you, I was like, yo, we do. No, what did I ask? I was just like, Sebastian, you alive? Like I text or on Instagram, and I got a voice message, and I don't speak Spanish. So I was like, ¿Qué pasa, bro? And I'm 30 years old. I had to Google. I was like, ¿Qué pasa? What does that mean? But. Well,
it's funny because I feel like you get a lot of the scope out of what people think like what politics are on the ground, and I'm like, man, it makes me hopeful about like politics and stuff like that on the ground because I'm like, Texas has this culture where like you have these motherfuckers, the most country motherfuckers in the world in Texas, come from Texas or whatever, and they'll be speaking Spanish to people at bars, like and they'll be, it's like the community where it's like, oh man, like I feel like rednecks and country people are more progressive than a lot of
people
like,
think.
Like a lot of like people that are like proclaimed liberals and stuff like that. I was like, that's an issue that the activist community has already covered. Where it's like, like a lot of people are just, they're just like faking the funk so they can feel good about themselves and not actually have to do anything in their community. And I'm like, hey man, these motherfucking rednecks. The motherfuckers will be hiring Mexicans.
Dude, I lived in they're not like, look how progressive. I lived in South Georgia, man. I went to the university.
Moving them out of their fucking neighborhoods. We need better policies. And I was like, whatever, you gentrified their fucking neighborhoods.
We put in a Whole Foods. Dude, I graduated from the University of Georgia, but my first 2 years I did in Valdosta, Georgia, which is, I always describe to people as a time capsule from 1865. But yeah, man, those are the rednecks of the rednecks. Yeah, man. Yeah. As much as there were some racist motherfuckers, there were also just some of the, just straight shooting, like, someone say something racist and just be like, that sort of country boy simple logic, and be like, man, you dumb motherfucker, like, what skin color got to do with it, man? He's a hard worker. And it's just like a simple, you're like, it's surprising.
Well, I have a Theo that owns a construction company, and he's my godfather, and in Santa Fe, and I had a conversation with him a couple weeks ago where he was talking about that, and I was like, we were talking about that because I grew up, very blue collar, and so it's like I feel like I have such a good an easy time communicating with people because I was like, I've had a job since I was 13 years old. You know what I mean? My first job was fucking air conditioning, repairing insulation, working on roofs in the sun. You know what I mean? Like fucking the sewer machines in houses, you know, fucking unclogging toilets and shit like that. And then working in the fucking attics in Houston at the time. Oh my God. Like it's so hot. 110 degrees.
Yeah.
You understand hard blue collar working Americans whenever you've done that. And I feel like a lot of like the division comes from, you know, like a lack of respect. And I was like, oh man, I worked as a mechanic. I worked at a flea market. I worked in retail, like before I joined the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
And but I had a job to help my mom out since I was 13, and so that makes me understand where I'm at a point where like my Theo, you know, maybe people probably. Oh, I didn't even mention he's white. Like he married my Thea, and like he employs so many, you know, just specifically Mexicans. Like the Latino community has their own thing, but he was talking about that because like. There's this kind of view of racism outside of Texas, where it's like funny because he's so country. He's from Arkansas. He's so country that it's like whenever people view him, they view him in the same way they used to put me in a little box, and it's just funny because he was talking about like. It's the wealthy people that he builds houses for, and like the rich people that build houses for, that he feels like that maybe they're more vocally liberal or whatever, but they're the most racist because they don't want their kids to work. Like Mexicans are working, you know what I mean, and like they don't want their kids to do the kind of like trade jobs that the Mexicans are doing. I was like, they don't have any minorities in their day-to-day life because like I always say that I would put in infantry platoons diversity against Silicon Valley, and I'm like, because I've had a couple of conversations with people and some CEOs in some rooms. I was like, oh man, you guys talk about a lot of things. This room is not, you know, more diverse than infantry platoon. And so he was talking about that. I was like, oh, a lot of the appreciation for Mexicans in Texas comes from having been earned by the development of like this stereotype of a hardworking construction worker. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good stereotype. I'm fine with that stereotype. When I was in the Marine Corps, I always remember my boys like talking to me like how I would be working so hard. And I remember my sergeant one time when I was digging a fight hole, I was like, I didn't want to give up the shovel because I always was like, my view was like, when you're in the field, this is the only opportunity you have to work out. And I was like, oh man, like, fucking don't give up. I was a team leader and I wouldn't give them the shovel. I wouldn't give my guys the shovel. But I was like, I want these reps. That's the way I was looking at it. Yeah. And there's like, man, you fucking Mexicans, like, I swear to God, like, you guys, I'll tell you what, you guys are the hardest workers.
The hardest motherfucking workers ever, dude. I lived in Atlanta, man. Holy shit. Those day workers, they'd be out there at 5 a.m.
And that's why I'm like, I think that specifically, I only have, you know, I've been all over the world and I've been all over the U.S., but like my view of things comes from Texas. And I was like, there's a lot more unity and stuff like that on the ground than there is you see on social media. I was like, so I've always made a point where I'm like, I don't want to hear about people who don't live near minorities, view on minorities, because they're the problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if I'm speaking to you, I'm speaking to you from a tiny apartment complex that's majority Black and Mexican. And I'm like, don't tell me like what I'm not seeing. Yeah. You know, if I'm talking about my interactions with police, I'm saying this with like some of my best friends, my brothers, my family are in law enforcement, and you don't want to expand on that completely because you don't want to like, you know, put people in a difficult position. But I'm like, man, I've worked with the most advanced law enforcement we're supposed to have in the U.S. I've worked with FBI, HRT. I've worked with DEA, FAST. You know what I mean? I'm like, and I was like, some of the solutions I've had, I was like, people aren't offering solutions. I'm offering solutions. We have people in Quantico training law enforcement already. We should just expand that. Because
what did you do with HRT?
The folks on HRT, you look at their school, and I'm like,
I know about them.
Like, it's so difficult.
They're insane. They're fucking insane.
That HRT stuff. I have a bunch of people have their patches, and when I shot with them,
that's crazy.
They have some sketchy stuff.
They're
the most badass. In my opinion, they're the most badass law enforcement in the U.S.
They're
because
insane.
They're like SWAT. If SWAT was on, if SWAT did Delta Force shit.
They're the Delta Force of SWAT. I had on a Delta Force guy, Dale Comstock, and I asked him, I was like, would Delta Force ever be deployed in the United States for anything? And he was like, well, no, that's illegal. But I was like, what would happen if there's a hostage situation at like the White House? And he said HRT. And I was like, why is that? He's like, because that's Delta Force SWAT. He's like, that is.
Well, a lot of HRT is former Delta Force.
Case in point.
So the thing is about HRT is that you have to be an agent for a year before you can even apply for the team.
Yeah.
So that gets a little bit of attrition. But I'm like, some of the solutions I was talking about, I was like, oh man, like we should be having, if people get mad at me because of like, I'm like, higher training standards without more funding, then I'm like, you mean like the Marine Corps is done for the history of our fucking service? Yeah. And I'm like, because today I was like, man, I remember a fucking full battalion getting hazed because a Marine got caught wearing a fucking earring downtown. Whole battalion was hazed for it because nobody would admit who it was.
Hey man,
we all knew who it was.
Group hazing, that's how you get a point across.
They hazed the whole battalion, and I was like, you telling me that you can't ask for more training when an American is killed? And I'm like, the Marine Corps will haze the whole battalion. And I'm saying specifically the Marine Corps because I don't know if I'm supposed to be talking about this, but
talk about
the Marines train with HRT.
Okay.
You know what I mean? They train where they train and who they train with, and like the cross trainer or whatever. That's who trains them. Mm-hmm. And that's where I'm like, why don't we use that as a resource? If you're going to be giving law enforcement military equipment and not military standards, the USMC, and because like the Marine Corps doesn't have qualified immunity, like you don't have that whenever you're like, fuck, I'll never forget the fucking cases against rapists in Japan, Marines or whatever, that are like the story when you're there. When I was a boot, and then I got there and these motherfuckers were still in a fucking Connex box prison because the Marine Corps was like, fuck you, rape this chick, the country can have you.
Yeah.
And that was like how it is, you know what I mean? Like and so like the UCMJ and stuff like that, where you're like the military standards and like right now a lot of things in law enforcement are incentive based, where like physical fitness and stuff like that. And I was like, I know the badass cops have a view of other cops because like I see them, I see these motherfuckers. I was like, man, you guys look like you can barely fucking walk.
Yeah.
Much less be in charge of protecting me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, when I communicate with people, I feel like one of the commonalities we have, like the overlay of where people agree is like I believe in the Second Amendment, because I was like, I think a lot of veterans have a view of the Second Amendment because I spent so much of my life shooting. All I did in the Marine Corps was shoot. You know what I mean? That's why I was a rifleman. I was a rifleman.
Yeah.
0-11. Shooting with live rounds, people that hated me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where like they wanted to fucking kill you.
Yeah.
But you get so comfortable around firearms when all you do is train with it constantly that there's not this fear whenever you see a gun, you don't freak out.
Well,
and I think that Texas says something better about that, because so many Texans have guns that they're able to process faster. You know what I mean? Like they feel safer around weapons, because a lot of people are like, people are getting killed because they were scared there was a gun. And I was like, man, like I don't have that fear. You know what I mean? Like you just be around guns so much, like you don't have that fear.
Yeah.
Where you're just like you're just so confident where that barrel is and how dangerous it is.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's not like I'm asking people to hold themselves to a standard that I wouldn't hold myself to, because I'm like, oh man, do I think that I train harder as a full-time student who's disabled than the majority of police officers? They're my friends. I know I do. Yeah. Like, I know I do.
Yeah.
Because I've shot with the best cops in the world at the ranges, and then I've shot with PD, and I'm like, these motherfuckers don't treat weapons the way you're hazed into treating weapons. You know what I mean? Like understanding ranges and ballistics of different weapons that they use. I'm like, oh my god, like you shouldn't be using this, you shouldn't be doing this. I was like, without the training a lot of it's too semi-anally checking the box. I was like, you can't do that, because if you're going to be in charge of somebody's safety, I mean, you look at the way MSG and security forces work in the military, where there's like any incident is considered an international incident, and the way they take it seriously, like they take it so seriously that it's like about people from another country, and like the safety of what they train. And it's like they're not even Americans, but they train so hard, and then they're in another country with people that speak a different language, with weapons, with more dangerous weapons, condition 1, and not having incidents with people, because they're so much harder. And I think that's where it's going to have to go, where you're going to be like, eventually you're going to have a higher attrition rate for law enforcement, because some of the people that join, from your community, and you know the way that you know like you have stuff on them, you're like, man, I don't know, shit,
yeah,
kind of a
yeah.
And I think that a lot of the progress comes from like cops that are just like not scared. They're more honest. They're like, I know how hard I train. I know what I hold myself accountable to or whatever. And they're like, I say that like, man, the good cops really have a problem with like the way the lack of the professionalism, stuff like that. It's the people who are good at their jobs who really resent the people that.
Yeah, because they all get painted with a brush.
Name.
They all get painted with a brush. It's just they all suck, right? It's just
when my boys that are cops are spending time at the gym, and they're just fucking Spartans.
Yeah.
So they can feel comfortable in any kind of situation with or without their weapon, like, and they go serve next to motherfuckers that I'm like, you see them, and I'm like, I wouldn't want them in a military uniform.
Like,
I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, and I think that people who don't have extensive training with weapons, they think like people are talking out of their assholes. Like, no, there's a confidence. The heavier your weapon is, the more stressed you get. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because the heavier it feels, the easier it is for you to pull the trigger because you're scared. You know what I mean? Like, so that's why we train weapons confidence. You know what I mean? Like, so much of training is like, so it's so easy whenever you have a gun in your hand that it's like it allows you to process things faster.
Becomes an extension of your body,
as opposed to, oh my god, this guy.
Oh god, I gotta get out the gun. Oh no, he blinked at me. 10 shots. Like it's.
And specifically, you know, in San Antonio, I remember like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, in Bexar County, they and this is not county's not as good trained as regular PD, but like they killed this white lady who had a pipe in her hand, and they shot her 14 times, and they killed a little boy that was living in a house behind her. And I remember when it happened, they killed this little 6-year-old boy, and they're suing, the family's suing Bear now, and our county sheriff is very, very progressive. So he's like, he wants better accountability for his people because he understands that, and that's how you grow within the community. And it was like these guys all had rifles. They all had AR-15s, and I was like, there's not the minimum requirements for training. Like the way it is now that you can just like have your own weapons and bring them or whatever with the minimal training. And I was like, if you would have had any kind of training with that kind of weapon, you would know. I live in an apartment complex.
Yeah, you don't shoot when there's people behind.
Weapons,
you're killing everything in that line.
It's because I understand the ballistics of weapons. So like, well, why am I not using 223 or like? Yeah, I have a lot of weapons, right? Yeah, and I'm like, why do I have certain weapons, whatever? Because I understand how ballistics work. Yeah. I'm not using a rifle that's meant for 600 yards.
You're not using a 300 Win Mag when someone breaks in your house.
Even if you have hollow points, they're going to go right through things. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, and so that's why you stick the handgun rifles, and I think that cops should be using more SBRs with hollow points. Yeah. But they're not using that because it's just the surplus of 223. It's a lot cheaper to make a 223. Just the way that just the way the gas works. It's easier. Like that's why the handgun calibers are so much more expensive because it's difficult. It's more difficult to get that gas right. So it's just a more expensive rifle. But like, so they unloaded on this chick and they killed the little boy. And I was like, yeah, she had a pipe in her hand. You were 50 feet away. She was not a threat to you even if she had a handgun. They were more than 50 feet away. Yeah. I was like, what's the point of using those rifles if you don't utilize what makes them safe? What makes them safe is like, man, when you get shot in Afghanistan, you understand how dangerous the rounds are from how far away they are, right? So like motherfuckers be popping shot at you. I'm not moving my head. You know what I mean? Like, and these people, like, she didn't end up having a gun at all. It's just a pipe. And they unloaded on her 14 shots that killed the little boy. And I was like, that fear that she might have a gun that enabled you to feel like your life was 5 officers shot her 14 times. And I was like, that's fear of a weapon. Because I was like, you could have a handgun at me at the end of my parking lot. And I'm like, I'm not scared. Yeah. I understand when that round's going to start to roll. Yeah. And, and I feel like the understanding of ballistics and the importance of understanding your weapons is so important. And it's just because police are so undermanned and underfunded all over the U.S. that they have to incentivize boosts and stuff. And I was like,
you got to cut corners.
You're addressing wrong issues. You know what I mean? You're not you're putting. I always say like the people that don't address issues, or whatever, they think things are going to go away. I was like, they don't really care about their communities because what they're doing is they're putting a Band-Aid on something that's like poisonous, and it's really. I was talking about. I always refer to. I was talking about this 2 years ago, when I was like, oh man, cops are going to be resented. 2 years ago, like, cops are going to be resented all over the U.S. because they're having to enforce unjust laws. Whenever I always say that, like in Austin, because I live in San Antonio. San Antonio is predominantly, we're a majority minority city, mostly Black and Latino. I always say that like weed is legal for white people in Austin, but it's not legal for Mexican and Black people in San Antonio. Yeah. And I was like, because it's used as a way to break up gangs, and you charge people with nonviolent crimes to take them off the streets. But you're making that community more dangerous because they're coming out as.
I mean, that's why they started the war on drugs. Was we can't get Black people for being Black, so let's get them for what do? They smoke weed. That's the beginning of the war on drugs. It's declassified.
Well, especially people don't know them. It's part of the problem is you're informing people of the history of things, and I was like, and then they get into the history of things not being important. They're like, well, I'm talking about right now. Then, so you almost don't even want to talk about it. It's like, oh, the history of the war on drugs is racist, but the history of marijuana and in Mexico and the relationship with why something
Reefer
is
madness,
much less of a like a personality inhibitor than alcohol.
Yeah.
And you look at the violence involved with alcohol and bars and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, well,
it's insane.
I don't have to be a status to understand that shouldn't be illegal. It's Schedule 1, which shouldn't be Schedule 1. It's the same as fucking meth.
Yeah,
and it shouldn't be that way.
No, it's retarded.
I said that I was like, the communities are gonna resent law enforcement because they're seen as like a form of protection for property. And whenever you're only enforcing laws, I was like, the rich side of San Antonio, all these kids that are super wealthy that they can be like hipster or whatever about smoking weed and stuff like that. And I'm like, and then you have people that are like you view as gangbangers and stuff like that, just because when they smoke it, like it's like, and they're permanently put in the fucking justice system, and it's like how do you not see that's going to be an issue? Of course they're going to resent police officers because you're only enforced there against certain people.
Yeah,
and it's like I feel like that made a lot of animosity, but I was like that's why I was like it seemed like I got quiet about it because I was a full-time student. I'm like I feel like it's important for people that are not full-time professional veterans to speak on these things, because I was like, there are the people that like, and I'm glad because they stopped fucking with me, they stopped engaging me. Not my friends. A lot of my friends in the law enforcement community came from the military community. Mm-hmm. And a lot of my friends in the law enforcement community just came because I was doing things for law enforcement. And so I'm like, I don't want that. I'm glad I don't have the responsibility of like responding to people. I was like, where I could explain it honestly now, where I'm like, a lot of these wealthy conservatives fund a lot of these people's lives. And I was like, if that's speaking fees or if that's trips to Oahu, mm-hmm. if that's boats, I was like, their views, I was like, it's they feel like they're helping the situation by being like back the blue line, the thin blue line. I was like, they're not helping, because what you're doing is you're creating a division, and when you politicize police, you're going to make them disliked by half of the community.
By default, half the people.
And so a lot of them resented me. I was like, listen, I understand you want ties to your community, but you're not like, I just feel like now I can be more honest about it, where I'm like, bro, like your whole life is going on trips to fucking to do things with law enforcement, stuff like that, and you're selling merchandise to them, you're selling politics to them. Of course those are your views. It's literally, you can say you're a nonprofit, but if it funds your life, that's not, to me, that's like, when you have access to all that, you're like, yeah, like if that's their whole life. There's a difference between activists that are trying to get like legal change, like you say with like the different military organizations that specifically try to like help with the GI Bill, mm-hmm. or activists that are like marijuana policy advocates. Like, and there's some really good veteran nonprofits that specifically, lobby but because that's what you have to do with capitalism, you have to adjust, and they lobby for legislation. And then there's a difference to the people that are just like reinforcing a bubble. And I was like, and I feel like I can communicate, because I was like, I'm doing these things as a full-time student. And if people are asking me now at this point, they already have a lens of, they're not going to be able to buy me you're not going to be able to shut me up or change my views with by offering me the world. You know what I mean? I think people understand. I was like, oh man, I could have a house built for me and live in a place where I just shut the fuck up and agree with certain things. I was like, no, I live in my community. I see these problems every day.
Yeah.
I can't run from it so easy. And I think that people in the military community, especially successful veterans that are capitalists, see what I'm talking about. And they're like, oh man, I feel what he's fucking talking about. These motherfuckers, like, all they do is go on trips and they have these views. And I was like, they share these views to piss people off. And then so they become that token voice where they're like, see this veteran that's a minority agrees with me or whatever. Yeah, really? What does he even do? Who pays his bills? Like,
you know, who's writing them huge checks? Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the disability community where they're like, it's gotten to that point where their sponsors and their speaking fees or whatever. I was like, man, I've been a paid public speaker. I'm a published poet. I'm a published model. I've been the face of advertising campaigns, an actor, but you know, just like this before I was back in school and just doing like physical stuff. And I'm like, I understand that they're saying things because they want to continue the role of having their things heard or whatever. And so that's why I'm like, I can be louder where I'm like, I'm saying these things. I still believe I'm the most advanced prosthetic unit in the world. I work harder than all these people. It doesn't come from sucking, or it doesn't come from kissing ass. It doesn't, you know what I mean?
It doesn't come from sucking the dick. Yeah.
I'm the best because not only my heritage, but the Marine Corps and the discipline, all these things that came in, that, you know, I could be that way because that was instilled to me by the best leaders in the world, legends of the Marine Corps, raised me in the Marine Corps. And I was like, and I'm so happy because, like, I always say that, like, a lot of people talk about the political, I always call them puppets or whatever. Yeah. Like, whenever they're talking about things, they like bring up like Gold Star families and stuff like that. And I was like, they can do that stuff with such ease because they don't have family that are Gold Star families. Yeah. And I'm like, I know so many Gold Star families that are so politically loud against, you know, like certain issues. And I'm like, oh man, don't say you represent the Gold Star family when you don't know any. Yeah. Because I know a lot. It hurts me that I know so many Gold Star families, so I can't say with these like this is what they died for when they're talking about Kaepernick and stuff like that. Yeah. I was like, really, because the Gold Star families that whose kids that I know personally who will live with me in my mind for the rest of ever are like hardcore into justice and progressive values, like police violence, stuff like that. They're really loud, and I was like, I just don't want to put the business out there. Yeah, because I have that, like, I will always defend Gold Star families because the best Marines I ever knew died in combat. And that's why I'm like, you have that. I feel like all my friends that support me no matter what, the love I get no matter what, is because they know. And it's really sad because I don't think you can build it. I don't think you can build the unity that you get from the veteran community out. And you can, activists that are like around like gang violence and stuff like that, they have that same mentality where they're like, they don't want more death. And so I feel like a lot of my boys like are so good at communicating with really different political views because it's kind of sad, but they got that because we lost so many bros that like you just have that like I can't give up on. I can't. Yeah, it's politics don't matter. Like these motherfuckers, like it doesn't matter because like they have that love that you can only get from tragedy. Yeah, and that's kind of sad. Where I'm like, oh man, we're the only ones that remember our faces, bro, our bros' faces. And so I'm like, oh man, these motherfuckers like that have the audacity to be like talk about things like that. I was like, because they didn't make the jump themselves. They don't have that themselves a lot of the time. And so that's why I'm so grateful for any support I get in the military community, because I'm like because they understand, like whenever I understand something, it's from a place of where I'm like, I'm being patriotic. You know what I mean? I'm fighting. Like when you see people comment about America's this or that, I was like, man, I feel like I'm more patriotic. Like I'm here defending America and like fighting for America. And these motherfuckers are just like especially it's like the hipsters, you know, where they're like they're anti-America or whatever. I was like, man, I've seen poverty all over the world. Yeah, I understand the femicide in Mexico and the gang violence in Mexico is why people come here. And I'm like, I'm not attacking these people that don't have any solutions, that just attack it or whatever. They just want to feel good about themselves. I'm not that. If I'm alive, I'm contributing to the conversation. You know what I mean? Yeah. I feel like I'm not trying to just attack. I'm trying to understand that I'm fighting for that red, white, and blue. I'm not trying to be like the people that just, you know, like they're not contributing and
pat themselves on the back,
like attacked.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh man, that's not me. Like, you have to understand, you have to be willing to talk about that, because I was like, I think that I always say that, like, a lot of the division comes from people who don't have any stakes in the game. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So they're just like, what I've noticed is, like, a lot of the hate and stuff like that comes from people that, like, they kind of just interact with people for political stuff. And so I was like, I'm glad I filtered that out a long time ago, where they're like, they already know that I'm not going to be that person that just posts MAGA stuff and, like, donate to this so I can fly me. I'm like, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, it's
in person. People come up to me and try to take pictures of me with stuff. I'm like, nope. Like, I'm never going to be that puppet. Yeah. I'll never be that where I'm like, they just want me to be that token. I'm like, nah,
yeah, you're the. It's like I always think of Norm Hooten, everyone knows from Black Hawk Down. You know, this is my safety. That guy, the real life Norm Hooten. After he retired from Delta Force, he went and got a PharmD, a degree in pharmacy, and is now researching opiate addiction. And anyone can get online and, you know, make a post of, like, opiate pandemic or whatever. Norm Hooten went and is actually researching the addictive qualities of opioids, because he's had so many friends get out of the military and then either from physical injuries or from PTSD turn to opiates, and then eventually that kills them, or that leads to withdrawal and then suicide. So I looked at it as like, Norm, what you were saying, like, continue to fight for your brothers. Norm Hooten was like, he's old, he's older, and he's like, okay, I can't be an operator in the field. What's the next best thing? Go get a PharmD, start researching the addictive qualities of this shit, and try to offer a solution. I'm just like, what a badass.
Those tier guys are so, like, I always love it, because I'm like, man, like, these motherfuckers that
different
are, like,
animals.
Harvard Business School, and they're like professional gunfighters, and I'm like, oh my god, like, it makes me so happy that it's like, I'm so proud of my community, because that's the people that are driving the conversation.
Fuck yeah.
And I'm like, I feel like it's a lot of the people that are like, either weren't military, or they're just like, I'm a finance major, I'm a business major, so I'm like, I don't want to attack you, but I do notice that a lot of the people that are super political about things don't have the credentials to be, like, super hard.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why is it always you motherfuckers?
Yeah.
And I get mad because I'm like, all these fucking tier guys that are in, like, business school, like their views are so, like, they were the smartest people in the military when they were in the military. Now they're, like, advancing themselves. Like,
they don't stop.
Whether it's SEALs that are work for NASA now.
Johnny Kim.
Like, you almost, it's almost easier to talk to veterans. Are like, are the smartest people in your unit talking about this the way you're talking about it? Do you remember the people that were working the hardest, that cared the most, that were fighting hard? Do they have your views right now? And you don't think it's a coincidence that the people that acted a certain way while in the military are also the people that conduct themselves,
are succeeding outside of it,
so brazenly now about things?
Yeah.
I was like, is there any chance that, it's not that? Like, is there a correlation? The causation, whatever.
Yeah.
Is there a correlation there? Like that, to me, that's why I'm like, I don't want to make a living off of telling those things, but I have enough knowledge of the opioid epidemic to vocally be like, you're gonna make Americans hate cops if you don't prosecute people that were responsible for killing 40,000 people a year with the opioid epidemic.
Yeah. What about all that Chinese fentanyl coming over the border?
And now they live in Malibu, retire, and their lobbyists ensure that they don't go to jail.
Yeah.
And I'm like, whenever you have killers of communities that are retiring in Malibu, and you have people in prison for 15 years for marijuana and nonviolent convictions, you're going to make the community hate police officers. Yeah. Because it seems like there's a protected class of people.
There absolutely is. There absolutely is a protected class of people.
You're guilty, depending on how much money you have to influence the outcome. You know what I mean? Yeah. And it's like, when you look at the people that are so vocal about it now, it makes me proud to be part of the veteran community, because I see them, because they can't ignore that hypocrisy. Yeah. And that's why they're like that. They're like, I can't, like, they'll be doing their own thing. They'll be successful in their own right. And they're like, fuck, I can't ignore it. Like, yeah. And so now I feel like I'm happy, because at least the people I interact with, they shut the fuck up about stuff they don't know about. They'll educate themselves about it first. And I'm like, even if they still do things, where they're speaking or whatever like that, they will no longer spew propaganda to get people to like them. And I think that's a real problem. And that's a problem because people don't understand how social media functions as a monetary, like they don't understand the advertising model of social media.
Yeah.
So they don't understand
everything's making money on there.
Yeah, they don't understand that whenever they're like that they're essentially being propagated to agree with each other. That's what drives social media, because it's people selling their privacy.
Yes.
And so whenever like these people don't like, they're not surrounded by the people that agree with them by accident. It's because of the suggested nature of that to make people, to canalize people into advertising blocks. And the same thing that happens with like why liberals lie about issues or whatever, because whenever you're incentivized to talk about something, to adhere to a certain set of guidelines that appeal to 18 to 35, that's an ad block.
Yeah,
we're talking about saying things, social justice and that stuff like that. It almost poisons the well.
It absolutely does.
Real social justice and activist leaders that are like, especially a lot of black women that I see in person, that are taking heat in person, and I see people get confrontational with them in person, and I'm like, it's almost like the well is poisoned by these fake woke liberals that are just like, they're tweeting from $1 million, complexes. And that's their job professionally. I was like, they're really hurting the activists. And the activists are talking about it now. Where they're like, who the fuck are you? Where are you tweeting from?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I'm
tweeting from downtown.
Capitalism sucks from my iPhone 12 being on my self-driving Tesla in Oahu. Hashtag woke. Hashtag justice.
And that's what, and that's why it's important. I think that where I'm like, if I'm talking about something, I was like, no, I'm not a fucking puppet. You're not going to see me defend a politician. You're going to see me defend American people. Like, because I did stuff with Beto, and I was like hardcore disagreed with him on stuff, but he was the only person talking about war on drugs.
Yeah.
And I understood the hypocrisy of the nature of an election where so much money was driven into it, because I'm a finance major. I'm a capitalist. And I'm a capitalist because I understand the history of the world. The only opportunities that have been created in the past 100 years for when you see the crimes committed against minorities and like Black, Latinos, indigenous communities or whatever. The only solutions that we've had, capitalism is the only one where people weren't mass slaughtered. And you see like the homophobia, not the homophobia. You're talking about like the persecution of the LGBTQ community,
throwing them off buildings, setting them on fire.
Like, a lot of like liberals that are just like for Twitter and stuff like that, they ignore like the persecution of those people. And I was like, whenever you're not fake, you can honestly talk about that. Like, oh, you're talking about somebody, some of these people that not only persecuted, but you're talking about people that murdered, intentionally killed disabled people, intentionally imprisoned the LGBTQ community. And it's like, because that's the only way they could function, to force people to work and stuff like that. And I'm like, people don't understand why China is a threat to America or why Russia is a threat to America. And I was like, you don't understand what kind of freedom you have whenever they're putting Muslims in internment camps.
Yeah, 2 million Uyghurs in China.
Yeah, whenever you to prevent the free development of what a government would reflect if the people voted within a democracy.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's why I was like, if I take offense to certain things, because that's what I literally bled for. You know what I mean? I don't mean it figuratively when people fucking post memes like, we're willing to fight. I was like, oh man, I survived.
You literally fought.
Or God, God help me, I survived. Maybe some people hate that I survived. They're like, oh man, because I guess there's a lot of people that are like, it's just so intellectually lazy to agree with things that they hear on the internet, and they're not educating themselves. And it's like, and because there's a lot of uncomfortable truths, what I mean? And I'm like, the answer has to be meritocracy, because anytime you get to a situation where you give somebody power, they're going to abuse it. And that's been shown with politicians, the public media figures. When you put people in power, you give them power. You never want to isolate power.
It corrupts.
Because
absolute power corrupts. Absolutely.
Yeah, men are weak creatures when it comes to love. The flesh is weak.
Yeah.
And so I think that when people understand that, it helps. It helps drive the conversation, because they're like, everybody's a little bit fucked up, and so what's the best chance of helping the most people? And that's where it's like, I can be honest about that in a way that's like, I'm very proud of the veteran community, because it seems like the most successful business capitalists in the veteran community are the most willing to speak about things, because they don't depend, their life does not, their legitimacy is not limited to by people agreeing with their views.
Yeah, they've walked through hell. They know. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some people that are they understand. And I'm a business major. Like, I understand what they're doing. They're like, there's a market niche for politically motivated merchandise, and so they're saying things to agree with things because that's what drives their brand loyalty. And it's like, well, you can't communicate with that honestly, but that's what you're doing, and it's because you learn that in business school, and you're just applying the basic business principles, and so you can't preach about authenticity. Whenever you're not doing any research to justify your beliefs. You're just being like, this is whatever, this is what drives my merchandise.
Yeah.
And I think that it's easier to communicate about it now because more people are much more educated about it. Man, this motherfucker's always saying this shit. Oh, what does he do for a living? Oh, what does he sell for a living? Oh.
Yeah. You see this guy pushing this hashtag.
He's always defending these things. And that's literally what he does for a living. That's crazy.
Yeah.
And then it's like these people that come into the conversation that are like, like they're stockbrokers or they're fucking, financial analysts in fucking New York, and people don't even realize who they're talking to.
Yeah.
They're like, these motherfuckers, like they would, they're fucking Rangers and they went to fucking Harvard.
Yeah.
And, now in their spare time, they'll like comment like, little things, and then they'll see these people that are just like hardcore, like social media people, and like comment like, oh, I hate on them. I was like, because they chose a life that depended on their education and didn't rely on them feeding people's bullshit to drive their growth. There's not, I'm like, God, you're talking to one of the smartest, most decorated people. You know what I mean?
You're talking, when you're talking to like a tier 1 operator, dude, they don't care about other people's opinions of them to the point where they're used to the people that don't like them shooting at them. You giving a mean tweet, that's the least of their problems. Like,
and I think that it's like, and it's a problem where you're like, oh man, I have to be more consistent because I'm like, there's not an opportunity. Like, I feel like it's too late to be reactive. It's too late. You're like, oh man, when I hear these motherfuckers' views in person, it's like, oh my God, like it makes me sad because I'm like, I kind of already see where people are going to go with the conversation before they even introduce themselves. Where like a motherfucker's got a MAGA hat on. I was like, hey, sir, I want to take a picture with you. Like, oh, buddy,
God damn it.
How do I not make this confrontational? The 6 feet has made it easier. The 6 feet has made it easier. And I'm like, now, because like I used to be like physically harassed in person. And I feel like I didn't finish that story. Like the things that made me on social media, like I've had Marines take a swings at me at bars for me denying that I was a Marine. It was like, there was like a situation, and it's funny because one of these guys was a detective. Because I don't wear grunt style or anything like that, motherfuckers would just at different places. I got a couple of incidents where this dude was like confrontational but that's why I love Marines. I fucking love Marines because I can deal with that violence. And got confrontation with him because he's like, oh, you're in the military, you don't act like you're in the military, whatever. And I guess only on my arm the only thing you can see is like USMC if you're really detail oriented, but sometimes I would wear long sleeves. When I had a better prosthetic, I would wear long sleeves that could fit under long sleeves. And it was like, well, I was like, oh, okay, fine, then I'm not in the military. Whatever, I wasn't a veteran, I don't care. I'm like full-time student. Like, and he got so mad, this dude got so drunk, and he took 2 swings at me, and I dodged both of them. And I was like, this motherfucker, I didn't know at the time he was a Marine, but and a cop. And I just thought it was funny. I was like, man, you fucking tried to assault me. And I was like, I love that shit because he was so defensive of the Marine Corps. And I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
But it was like people don't understand like what developed my personality to be reserved in person was because I've had people at the VA. I've had people follow me to the prosthetics downstairs at the VA because I wouldn't tell them my story. And because I've done so much work with Vietnam Purple Heart recipients, because the combat community is pretty tight in San Antonio, like now I feel like I can understand where I'm like, oh, these people that are combat veterans, they don't talk to me like that. They understand my eyes before they understand things before I even have to speak to them. They just give me a nod, physical. They know not to ask stupid questions. But I'm like, I've had security had to stop this guy from like, they had to pull him out because he was screaming because I went in the back and I was just there for a medical appointment with prosthetics. Followed me down because I was like, I would tell him my story and I was like, this guy had a Desert Storm hat on. And I always thought it was funny where it's like the veterans that are crazy like that. I'm like, man, this motherfucker didn't do shit. And he has this like entitlement. Like, you're not the only one that injured, bitch. I know the records of Desert Storm. you have 18 combat deaths in Desert Storm.
Yeah.
But you didn't go through things to make you that crazy.
Yeah.
And and I don't always volunteer that my dad was a special forces medic, and was drafted and served 20 years in the Army. That's why I was born in San Antonio, and did stuff in Panama, and so I don't volunteer that all the time. Or it's sometimes when you have unstable veterans, they kind of project that on you, and people don't see. I guess I never explained that enough. Where I'm like, I get it so much in person that I had to adjust. Where I'm like, I had to be more proactive. Where people come up to me, I'm like, I stop them before they get to that point where they get heated, because I learn. I'm like, oh, if I give these certain answers, people can get really aggravated with me really fast.
Yeah.
And so you're already working to de-escalate. People thinking you're being an asshole by being like quiet or cutting them, curt.
Yeah.
Just like, I have to have this conversation before you say something stupid and get heated with me. And I was like, because it had to happen, 10 times a month for me before I was like, okay, I have to be smarter about like who I. I'm just walking at the fucking HEB and people get, like, hey. Now,
yeah.
What are they wearing? What are they going to say? You know what I mean? I'm like, you just process it faster. Like, thank you. And you just don't let them say anything more.
Yeah.
I had too many assholes.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah.
Assholes. I've been physically confronted.
Yeah.
Oh my God, man. Like, I've had people where they're like apologizing to me and they find me on social media. I'm like, oh my God, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were decorated or whatever. Yeah. And I'm like after they like tried to start physical shit with me, and I was like, listen, and just from denying them the opportunity to hear my story, where like I was just in a social setting, and they're like so aggressive, and they get so animated whenever you're like, I don't want to talk about it, and then later on they're like, oh shit, like I'm sorry, I didn't realize, because it's just easier to lie than to be like, hey, the reason I want to talk about it is because, you know what I mean? Like, oh, like, my friends from my unit know, but like, oh, you're the patrol leader. You plan a patrol and somebody dies and you live. You know what I mean? And they have families that were dependent on them and stuff like that. Like, people don't understand that's what they're trying to communicate to me about every single time.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, it's not like I went to therapy for years to fucking be able to just get over that, physically recover, years of surgeries and recovery just to get to the point where you could ask me these stupid ass fucking questions so you could feel good about your politics, because that's what a lot of it is. It's like a lot of the thank yous or whatever, but people would get so heated about that in person, and I would have parents like of grown men apologize to me in the DMs like, I'm sorry my son got in your face and you pushed him, and I was like, yeah, well, if you touch me I'm gonna get physical with you. Like, and I feel for so many people in the amputee community, because especially females, all these physical interactions where people like grab me and stuff like that, I'm like, oh man, I train really hard to make sure that I can communicate with my body effectively, and it's like I can't imagine how it is for other visibly injured people with prosthetics, where it's like where they don't have the skills to just be like communicate or the audacity to be like, hey bitch, don't fucking touch me. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, they don't have that. They have to be nicer, and they almost like let more abuse into their sphere or whatever. And then I'm like, man, I had to learn to be me. Where I'm like, man, I got grabbed by too many people, and there's wounds that people don't know about, so I'm preventing them because I don't want to brag about. I'm not one of those people that like, I have a lot of injuries that I hide, so I'm like, I don't want to tell people how to hurt me. So that's what they're doing, and that's why for a long time I didn't tell people. I'm like, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? I'm like, listen, man, I barely have use of this hand, and I'm not on steroids, so I don't have that recovery. And that's not to say like one day I'm like, I'm already looking at stem cell research, and if I get to the point where I don't have kids or anything like that, so if I get to the point where I have a family and stuff like that, and stuff like that is the only option, then of course I'll delve into that. But I don't like people's dishonesty about how they got to places where they're like, hey, this disability person, it's like, watch my 3-month transformation. You too can start this. I was like, yeah, just start all this cycles of
just
stuff.
Just start HGH, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, mate. It's like, for a while I tried to be Paralympian, but the injuries were too much, and that's why I really appreciate the Combat Week Paralympians, because they're doing things without drugs, and then it's just like so hard because their injuries were had at past the development stages of their lives, and so their ability to adapt is based on their will and like the advancement. Like, a lot of people don't understand when they see me and they see my arm as my only injury. They don't understand that when I was wounded, my back took the blast, and they're like, "Oh, see, you have one good arm." They don't understand that what this arm is, but they're like, they don't understand that I was in the infantry or that it was my back that took the majority of the blast. They're like, "Oh yeah, you don't have any." Like, yeah, no, it's just my arm. It's not like my arm has like 10 surgeries just for skin grafts just to be able to, because my arm was too. My bone, when I was wounded, I had wound back on for like months and months and months, and where it's just like you had an open wound and it just sucks out the fluids, the excess fluid, because they couldn't decide what to do because I didn't have enough muscle or skin to cover my wound.
Yeah.
So whenever you have that, the chances of a skin graft accepting you fails. Yeah. And so I had a bunch of failed skin grafts for years of my life. They attempted skin grafts before they shortened my arm. Because they're like, we can't, your body keeps rejecting them. Yeah. And I was like, that was years of me in the hospital bleeding to try things to recover. And like, people don't understand that history. So they're like, they kind of only see you like where you are now, and they make assumptions, and they're like, oh man, like, I learned from the disability community to be like, when people are like, I don't see you as disabled. And I'm like, oh my God, like, you don't understand how physically I live on the second floor to get my groceries out. Like I fucking, I tore my meniscus trying to get out of my truck with my arm. Like they don't understand. We're like, man, at the end of the day, I can barely do anything with my hand. And last year I was Ubering to school because I couldn't drive back and forth because my hand couldn't, it would cramp up just from the driving after classes. So I would just lift to school. And so that's something that was like, people didn't know about that except for my disability people at school. And so, you get a lot of, I don't see you as disabled because you're this and that. And I'm like, oh my God, it's like, it's not like I can barely, like, it's so hard with the prosthetic because there's this one's so bad and I've had a good one. Like the pain is something that I didn't expect to anticipate to deal with. And, explaining to people the history of prosthetics, I was like, the reason that there's not advancements is because in Vietnam, the Kazakhs weren't as advanced, so the survival rate was so much lower. And so, like, there's not a history of all these amputees because they died in combat. Yeah. And I know because I've seen amputees in combat that didn't make it. And if we didn't have these advanced Kazakh systems, I was Kazakh by a British motherfucker too, so I have a lot of loyalty to the Brits.
So I don't want to keep you. Are you free to keep talking for a little bit? I don't want to. I've kept you for an hour and 10. You said you could only. I just don't want to hold you.
No, you're good. I haven't even. I could go for like 15 more minutes. I'm actually just waiting on my.
Yeah, no. I'm fine with talking. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't keeping you over. I don't want you to lose track of time. I'm gonna go grab my charger, Sebastian. I'm tasking you with filling the dead air.
Okay. Yeah, I am. So if I'm filling this with dead air, part of my reasoning for coming to the podcast was just to communicate things that questions I get a lot in person and on social media that, people ask me and I, want to say the same thing over and over. So you don't have so you don't have to reference it. But one of my reasons for wanting to advance prosthetics is because how bad my injuries are to my sound side and my back. And my knees, my injuries, where I'm already looking at how difficult things are for Vietnam veterans who have significantly less advanced injuries as me. And I'm like, oh man, stuff is already this hard. I can't even imagine what it would be like in 10 more years with the onset of more advanced issues coming apart. I'm like, I have to be more disciplined about things now because I understand how bad things could get. Because there's just not a lot of people that lived from traumatic amputations before the 2000s.
I'm a moron. I'm an absolute moron. I was looking for my charger and it was behind my computer. God damn it.
Happens to the best of us.
We're all idiots. Yeah, so you kept saying that the one you have now isn't good, but the other one you had was good.
So Man, I used to have a really good arm. I called it Arminator, and I say it was more famous because, like, you don't like doing that, but, like, yeah, I don't like doing this because, like, I hate having to feel like credentials for people. So, like, I understand my ability to attract attention because my unique situation, and I looked at it as kind of like a responsibility because I used to get offered TV shows so much, and so I was like, when I mean that, I was like, man, I've been on the front page of New York Times, I've been in Time Magazine, been in USA Today, been in Washington Post. I've done stuff for NBC and stuff like that, CNN. And that arm was represented. And so people saw me with a lot more able of an arm because I was so naive about prosthetics that I didn't understand that how important the competence of every single prosthetist was with building a prosthetic. And I didn't know that at the time. So I could show you an old socket and explain the physics of the differences, but it's just that people, it's like you could have somebody who was building a motorcycle try to build an airplane, and that's a good way to explain why somebody who built a leg socket wouldn't be good at building an arm socket, because they're understanding of things, because there's sensors in my prosthetic.
Yeah.
And they have to be in exact places because I had advanced surgeries to work to be able to get to this level with the prosthetic. And I didn't know that every prosthetist didn't understand robotics to the level of every other prosthetist, or the basics of the fundamentals of upper extremity amputations, because they haven't been written. You know what I mean? They didn't learn it in school because they were written as after they already graduated.
Yeah.
And so I didn't understand why. Like, I had to have a bunch of prosthetics fail before I was like, okay, I have to be really mean about accepting what I can, and I had prosthetists give up on me before I was like, okay, now I have to be like, this is my life. I can't spend more of my life disabled whenever your job is to build a prosthetic for me. Yeah. You're getting paid, compensated to do it. I need you to do it well, because it's my life. And now I think my team understands that to a level that nobody else did, and to at least to the level my first prosthetist did. And my experience is really like, I wish I didn't have to spend more of my life disabled and insecure about things I couldn't do, because I grew up very blue collar, and so I can't do the things that I used to be able to have the opportunity to do in my spare time and work, like because now I can't just do physical jobs for spare money, and so now I have to be smarter about everything that I do, and including what my future will be in the business world. I'm like, oh man, I can't lean back on, you know what I mean, like roofing and shit like that. Like I would have been able to, because that was just what I grew up on. And so people always like reference that, like, this arm was built like 7 or 8 years ago.
Okay.
And you see the difference in the socket. This looks like a leg socket. This looks like an arm socket.
Okay. My
arm is really small, and this thing is like 4 times the size of my arm. So I had to work out really, really hard just to be able to lift this at all, which is a throwback to, I couldn't use prosthetics for the first couple of years of my injury because my skin grafts would bleed inside my socket.
Yeah.
And then eventually they gave up on the skin grafts and they cut my arm shorter. But I had to lift every single day for months and months just to be able to move a prosthetic past here. And whenever I first got wounded, they didn't think that I would be able to use a prosthetic because my arm was so small. And then I would lift every single day just to be able to move it like 15 centimeters, you know what I mean, above, because past 90 degrees, when my arm is so short, so much weight is out here. Every time I move my, like, it's, I always say for people to differentiate between missing an arm and missing a hand, like I say that this is a hand. This is an arm. And so a lot of like amputees, I feel like I have a lot of respect in the amputee community because they understand how hard I worked. My amputation is so high, and my traumatic injury makes having complicated prosthetics even more complicated. And so whenever I'm communicating with amputees or whatever, they understand that it's like, oh man, there's a difference between missing an arm and a hand, because so much of my difficulties is that the elbows aren't good enough yet.
Okay.
This elbow is about 15-year-old system. Okay. And it's, I was like, I'm complaining about it, but I was like, yeah, because I expect them to get better. It's like, that's why I'm like, I believe in the meritocracy of things. The competitive nature of technology is what drives it, and it needs to get better. And so, like, I always say that, like, this is supposed to be like the most advanced hand in the world, one of the most advanced hands in the world. So I don't want to say the names, but I'm like, I'm not sponsored to, but I was like, people don't even know I have this hand because I don't use it because it's so fragile. And it makes me upset whenever I talk to amputees in the amputee community because I don't use it because it would break every 10 days if I used it for real. So I stopped using it and I had to fight really hard to get this one. It's called the B Bionic, and it's a lot cheaper than this one.
Okay.
And so I used to have a really good prosthetic, and so much of that is the prosthetic ability to build a good socket, and this is a really bad socket. And so it's so painful for me to use my arm every day that I have to wear a whole body harness.
Yeah.
Just because I have scars from how bad the harness system. I paid for all this.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm like, where I can resent the puppets publicly, because man, I'm paying for my own shit.
How much
from the VA?
How much?
I mean, I'm having them.
How much did that have?
I spent hundreds of dollars. You build in my harness, and I'm like, that's why I'm like, with where prosthetics are, I was like, because I feel for other amputees, and I didn't know it was so complicated because I was so naive about prosthetics when I first got wounded, and now I understand how much more complicated it is, what it's going to take to drive them forward, and people see a robot arm and they think positive things. They think this is where they don't see it as like a piece of crap. In the same way they wouldn't see a Ford Pinto. They're like, at least you got a car. But if let's say your Ford Pinto breaks down on your way to your job.
Yeah,
that's the way I want people to understand prosthetics, because I've had it break at school in the middle of class and like it malfunctioned really loud, and I'm like, people always say this, so surprised I'm so humble. I'm like, man, you never had to physically struggle in front of kids, fucking college student teenagers in the middle of class and have it break down. So embarrassing. You have like a little teenage girl next to you ask you if they can help you, and I'm like, what that does to as a male ego, it's so hard. You're like, oh god, like you can't put your backpack together to get out of class. And it's like to see a little girl that's like 5 foot, can I help you?
Yeah.
And I'm like, motherfucker. And then you get that at the HEV everywhere you go.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like when people see you struggle, like viejitas or little old ladies, and they'll be like, ay, pobrecito. Like, can I help you? And it's like, that's where I'm with prosthetics. Like, I want them to get better because I want to struggle.
Yeah.
I don't want to, it's like, people don't look at it as like a vehicle. So it's like, if I'm working and it breaks, that's a real issue for me. And that's something where I'm like, I didn't realize I didn't have to stay physical to advance them. And my prosthetists changed their mentality in the past year, where they used to be like, yeah, if it breaks, you just come in. And I was like, that's not acceptable. That's not an acceptable medium for me every single time. Their mentality was, you come in and it breaks. I've had my harness break and pop off and the most embarrassing situations so many times. And I'm like, it's not that easy, because if I'm dependent on it, like changing a tire, I've had to break while I was changing a tire in the rain. I'm like in a fucking really high stakes situation where it's like raining, I'm on the side of the fucking road, and I'm really dependent on it. And you know what I mean? And so like I have to explain it to people. I'm like, this is like my mode of transportation in activities of daily life, and that's what like people don't view prosthetics. They see advances, and it's like, if it's a piece of crap, I'm saying it's because I've had a better one. The technology is do better. It's just confidence of prosthetists, and where prosthetics are now is not where they could be, and they're nowhere near where this is. You know what I mean? And whenever I can do this, like for the video people on the podcast, like all the things that I can do, and here, in order to use my hand easily, I lay it on the table because it's so heavy. To be able to lift it, like to move the elbow, it's so difficult. Lay it, pound it down to be able to use the hand. Like I can open and close my hand, and I can't lift it here anymore. Hopefully, I can. Hopefully, with my next prosthetic, it'll get better. But like people, like why they don't see why I can't do these different things, and I'm like, you see all the different movements that you have with your hand, and then people that are missing their hand only. They use their bicep and elbow a lot to do things like close bottles and open bottles. And for me, I don't have that option. Like my amputation is so high and my residual limb is so sensitive that I never had the opportunity to be like, if I try to, once my arm's off, I'm more disabled. So my prosthetists changed their mentality from, if it breaks, we'll just fix it. And I'm like, That's not acceptable.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
and I didn't know that was going to, because my old process wasn't like that. We're like, oh, if this breaks, it's in the middle of nowhere. I was active duty too, so like if this, I got out. I wasn't forced out of the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps, if you're wounded in combat in the Marine Corps will keep you forever, no matter what. That they differ from the other services in that regard. And so I think maybe my process took it more seriously because I was active duty and it was like I was dependent on it. And now my process is to that point where I'm like, hey man, this could be a life or death situation. And like, it's not just work, but it's like I don't want to have to be stuck to living close to my prosthesis every single time my prosthetic breaks.
Yeah.
And I feel for amputees whenever I'm talking about prosthetics now, because if I'm a real person and I'm really worried about my labor, my ability to labor effectively in the future, like it's so hard because they're not to the point where people can depend on them really. And some of the amputees that communicate with me, like they have that issue. They're just regular workers, you know what I mean? Like you don't, like, I don't get Social Security disability. Some do. I don't get Social Security disability. You know, like I just have the GI Bill and VA pay. But like the amputees that don't have anything like that, if I wasn't going to school, I wouldn't be able to fucking afford to be able to fix my own, pay for my truck, much rent, much less, you know, pay for my own prosthetic parts, which I have. And like the amputees that don't have access to that, it's like they need them to get better because their lives depend on them, and they can only afford one, you know, every couple of years.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's where I'm like, oh, they need to get better because people, it's kind of still like a niche thing now. And I'm to the point where now I learned, like if I had a prosthetic for this many years, there's people that could have already graduated school that if I would have been more open about my prosthetic, they could have already been making progress.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because they've already graduated engineering school. And I understand things at a different level with the degree plans and stuff like that. There's not enough engineers in prosthetics. And maybe that's because people don't see them as a means for making life less disabled yet. And that's what some of the good thing is about a lot of the disability activists talk about, how so many leftists in politics are so anti-disabled people. Like whenever they do things, whenever they're talking about, they like hate disabled people, and there's like a really good discourse about that, where they're like, when they're talking about like things that make life easier are accessibility options for disabled people. For them, they just think of it as like as like laziness or like capitalist things. And you're like when they're talking about plastic straws and stuff like that, like whenever people have limited use of their limbs, like that's really the only way for me to. I could not live in society. My injuries are too advanced. I can only exist in 2020, like because I'm already to the point where I can't feed myself or shower at the end of the day if I use my hand too much during the day. And admitting that was new this past year. My father passed away, and I was like, man, I'm not indestructible anymore.
Yeah.
Now I have to stop doing things and I have to be more honest to people about my limitations, so they don't put me in a situation that I won't be able to, you know, see my way out of. And so like there's a lot of that in the talk in the disability community now, where they're like super vocal about like a lot of leftists or liberals or whatever. They're like so fake that they're like, it's kind of, a lot of things come off as like hating disabled people, because like the accessibility, like some of the other things that we rely on can kind of be seen as waste. And it's like, yeah, you just don't want us to exist to a certain point. We're like, oh, why do you need prosthetics? And I'm like, there's not that many people that need prosthetics now. And so like the turnover with prosthetics is so high. Like people can, I have a bunch of sockets or whatever. Like some of the conversations can come off as like making disabled people feel like their accessibility things, maybe they're making regular people's lives a little bit easier, and that makes people hate them for being like, they're thinking they're lazy or whatever. But I'm like, but that's the only way that they can live. You know what I mean? A lot of the things, a lot of the advancements in technology, specifically even for me, like I can't type, and that's one of the things that I can, but I need voice messaging. It's more difficult. Like if I'm typing, I can't do anything for the rest of the day. So when I'm writing a paper, I can't do anything because my hand will be cramped up to, I'll get claw, and I'll get so scared where I can't move my hand past 90 degrees because it won't come back. It'll just lock up, and it's like the most terrifying thing in the world whenever you're like, there's nobody to help you. I don't have a caregiver. And like, that's something where I'm like, I can be more vocal now. I'm being honest. So like, listen, a lot of these motherfuckers that have these views or whatever, that are like the professional veterans or wounded, whatever, like they have their lives so pampered that they can, maybe that's what, maybe they need it. Maybe they have families. Maybe some of the reasons I'm not vocal about things is they have families. and I don't want to ruin things for their family. But I'm like, they have caregivers, their lives are pampered, they live in houses paid for by other people. And like, whenever I'm saying things, I'm representing myself with knowledge of also people with disabilities that don't have access to all these different funds and pampered lives and caregivers and stuff like that, where things are more difficult for them. And I wouldn't understand that if they weren't difficult for me. And so if I'm talking about prosthetics, where they need to be or whatever, I'm like, I have that the knowledge of the disability community informs me now, where I'm like, oh man, like if it's this hard for me, why would I want to make it this hard for another amputee? Because like if they're like, why don't you I've gotten asked why I didn't patent this and stuff like that, or I'm just giving the technology free for amputees in the DMs. And I'm like, because I understand how hard it is being disabled when I don't have anybody to rely on. And people don't see those struggles, so they can see it's just like, that's where the I don't see you as disabled comes in. And I'm like, motherfucker, like, I can't even bend down to get my fucking shit out of my fridge with this arm on. You know what I mean? Like I tore my hamstring trying to work out with this because it tightened on my hamstring, my back hamstring, trying to figure out a way to work out with this. And all the different times of growth, I was like, I don't want to deal with it. I don't want other people to deal with it. And I feel like there's a lot of dishonesty about how good prosthetics are, just for like social media and commercials. Because I've been in commercials, but like movies, like just it's kind of a toy. And I was like, what you're doing is you're giving people things that are very fragile. That they want to be able to rely on for real. And that's why people don't use prosthetics, because they're so fragile. Like the durability is an issue, and that's why I push this in, because it's the most durable one that I've ever encountered. And just people don't really look at prosthetics yet to the point that they're like as an accessibility thing. I've worked so many prosthetics just because there's so many more leg amputees that the technology was able to evolve so much faster, because that's where the survivability, to give you numbers, is in Iraq and Afghanistan, there's less than 300 combat wounded upper extremity amputees from Iraq and Afghanistan. And that doesn't just, I like to be vocal about the all upper extremity amputees. So anytime you get higher up, you get closer to your neck, injuries are kind of ugly. So that's why there's less arm amputees, even from stateside, from like motorcycle accidents, because their injuries are so advanced, because it tends to be nerve injuries from neck stuff. I had neck stuff whenever I was first wounded, but from whenever incidents happen, they just don't survive. So that's why there's like 7,000 or something like that, between 3,000 and 7,000 combat wounded leg amputees from Iraq and Afghanistan, because their survivability was so much higher, because tourniquets and quick clot and stuff like that, and the CASVAC was so much faster. And so upper extending amputees, like whenever you have somebody up here, arteries closer to your heart, and the injuries are higher up, and so a lot of people in the military community understand that what I'm talking about, that because they're like, they know firsthand that whenever somebody was wounded with a higher up, the survivability was, a lot lower. And that's part of the reason why prosthetics for upper extremity people aren't as high. It's just there's not that many.
It's you said you were was it Helivac? What did you say it was? Hazvac?
Hazvac.
And what is hazard evac? Is that what it means? Hazard.
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I kind of assume everybody knows what that. So I don't. So when I was wounded, I was CASVAC on helo. Part of the reason my injuries are so bad is because they didn't have skin graft technology in Afghanistan when I was wounded, so they couldn't attempt skin grafts on me fast enough for them to take. So later on, the next year they got skin graft technology because of all the injuries, and they were able to save people's limbs better. But I was CASVAC on helo by Brits, and I think my friends from my units, like they know why I don't talk about things like at a certain level or whatever. And now if I'm being more vocal because it's easier, the pain for them and the pain for me is easier. But like, I was CASVAC, and whenever I'm talking about things with patriotism and stuff like that, the lens of like, I'm saying that, as somebody who I don't care that I was wounded. I care that a lot of men, the best men that I've ever met, are sad that their voices aren't heard in the very veteran community because they died. And so my squad leader passed away on on the helo right next to me whenever I was hit, and that's why like sometimes I'll be reluctant to talk about that, because like people don't understand that I'm talking about somebody else's family, and you know, he was like right next to me, and so they tried to save him. He had collapsed lungs, and it's just collapsed lungs are very, very difficult. You know, multiple amputations, collapsed lungs, they're very difficult to deal with, and they couldn't save him, and he passed away on helo, and that's called a CASVAC. And the Marines call it a CASVAC. They might call it something else in the Army, but we call it a CASVAC.
Yeah.
I guess I should have talked about that when I
talked
about Vietnam.
No.
CASVAC is just helo, or it doesn't necessarily be helo. Just any way to evacuate casualties.
Yeah, no. That's not your fault. You brought it up, and then I had to go find my charger. That's on me. I'm sorry if I'm not talking a lot. I'm kind of just mesmerized listening to you talk. Normally I never shut the fuck up on this podcast, but with this one I'm finding myself just like, I forget that I'm like, that this is my podcast. I feel like I'm just watching you, and I'm like, oh fuck, I gotta talk.
I feel like I have to take advantage of the time that I have now.
Yeah.
Because at least for this semester, I've been using the past couple of summers to work for nonprofits and stuff like that. But at least this first semester, I won't be driving to school. I'll be at Zoom. So I'm like, oh man, like I have to be more proactive about. It's kind of hard when people. I kind of always used to assume, because I couldn't hide my stuff, that people already kind of would have known my story, so they wouldn't have to ask things. And you know, it's probably just ignorant of me. It's like, oh, you don't know me by now? I live in San Antonio. Like, you would know.
I don't know your story, but I haven't asked because like you were just saying about like the CASVAC, like, you know, it's hard to talk about it. What you said about your arm is the worst day in your life. So like, I don't actually know what happened. I've been following you for almost a year. I don't actually know what happened to you, and I mean, I want to know, but I also don't. I don't know if that's because you said earlier it's the worst day of your life. You don't want to talk about it. So, no, I don't know what happened, and I am curious what happened. But at the same time, I don't want to.
Yeah, no, I thought I want to. I don't even see, because I'm so used to giving like elevator speeds.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was a rifle patrol leader, and I was a rifle patrol leader. Part of the difficulty is that there's a lot of my friends that are still active duty, you know, it's kind of like a sacredness. I mean, to me, I feel like it's so easy for the puppets to talk about them because they don't have any experience themselves. But for me, it's like, yeah, man, I mean, it's different whenever you watch men die. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to talk about that, but you're like, motherfucker, have you ever seen a man take his last breath? It changes. Like somebody you love, somebody whose family you knew, somebody who did everything they could to protect you, and somebody whose responsibility it was for you to protect, and then leading the patrol, planning the patrol, having to hear from their families about why this patrol was changed, and all. I mean, people don't even understand the guilt that's associated with that, because you live to deal with the consequences of a singular moment and how many different situations could have been applied. You know, did I make like so many questions from people that lived. And your own boys, you know, like they want to understand what happened, and the families for years. It was just, and then the trauma itself. You're like, oh, I didn't remember anything because I was so drugged up, and so I was knocked out. I was drawn into the canal when I was wounded, and I feel like now I'm to the point where I can communicate about it. It used to be every time I would talk about it, I would have nightmares, and then people would be like, oh yeah, like just in passing, they're mildly curious about my situation, and they're like, oh, you don't understand, you're gonna cause me nightmares for the rest of this fucking week. And like so like, but you know, now I'm to the point where I can be proud of it. I think it was my father passing away where I was like, god damn, I never talked to my dad, but because he was a veteran, he was the only one that never asked me anything. He just believed in me, and he supported me no matter what, because he didn't have to, because he was a medic, he was an armed force medic, and he understood me in a way that everybody else kind of hated me and gave up on me for like not being able to be regular again. But they didn't understand how much pain I was in, or the guilt of the consequences of people passing away and that's why I'm so happy. There's some people that are really vocal on social media that are from my unit, like captains and gunnies and stuff like that now, where they're talking about things. So I'm like, I'm so grateful that they talk about things, emotions openly, because I'm like, because people will see them like, man, these motherfuckers are the most decorated fucking captains and gunnies in the military. They're war heroes, and they're talking about, honestly, about the guilt of being able to negotiate those things within their own emotions. And I'm like, man, I never thought about that. Like, I was never brave enough to be like, talk about that so openly, and they are. And that makes me happy, because like it makes it easier for people who are struggling with PTSD and stuff like that to be like, oh, this motherfucker's talking about that shit. The people that are really struggling with it, not the people that are, that are doing it professional, but the people that really struggle with it. I think it helps, because it helps me whenever I see people that I look up to say that they're weak, and they're not hide their emotions, not weak, but just like, I now know that I'm like, man, I'm better than all these fucking puppets, and I can be better than them any day of the week. I've overcome more than them. When I say I literally crawled out of a canal of my own blood, I was drowning in a canal of my own blood. All I could see was red, and that's what woke me up, that I wasn't dying. I mean, that I wasn't draining. And I'm like I literally crawled out of, just massively. It must have been really traumatic for my boys to see how massively wounded I was. And fucking led my fire team on, out of the canal, and told my squad leader, I didn't realize how wounded I was, so I was just like trying to fucking take control of my team, like, motherfucker, let's go. And they were like, my sergeant gunner was so funny. He's like, Gallegos, and you're fucking, like, your arm is missing, and you're like yelling at us. And like, I don't think you're in charge of us anymore. And I don't have to worry about my boys disagreeing with me or whatever. They love me, because it's like, we have things that you don't want to have to make people as unified as we are, because it took a lot of tragedy.
Yeah.
And good men died for us to have that kind of bond. And you don't. It makes me sad, but you shouldn't want to create that, because that's why we have to be vocal, because like, you want to prevent that. And but like, personally, I'm grateful, because I wouldn't be so like, I didn't know, I had a grasp of things because my guys talked about it, my saw gunner and the captains and stuff like that, majors and stuff like that, they talked about what happened, and I didn't understand the grasp that people knew my situation, because you're just like, you only think about the guilt of not talking about it, because somebody's death is on your hands. And that's the case for so many people, because we lost so many Marines. The best Marines that I've ever knew died in combat, so there's no point in seeing like the puppets and their views, because it was like, you guys weren't the leaders in the military while you were in the military.
Yeah.
Like, the good ones die young. That's why they say that. The good ones die young. So it's like, I think that the reason that so many veterans are stuck with me, because they have that lens. They're like, they have that lens of like, oh man, they know my story, so they know when I'm talking about things, I'm talking from a patriotism. And they understand like that it's not so easy for me to bullshit, because I have the perspective that like, I can't say anything. I would never intentionally piss people off or troll people or whatever, because men died for my ability to do that. Literally, you know what I mean? Not like, figuratively. Like, other people in the military died. I was like, no, I watched good men die.
Yeah.
I watched little, just the things. It's just different when you have friends that passed away and you watch friends pass away. It's like that gravity is something that is like, you almost resent, that it's so easy for people to lie about things, like how they feel, and propagate Cap, like stuff with Kaepernick kneeling and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, fuck Patriot. I'm like, you motherfuckers have no idea what it's like to lose a man in combat and what they died for, because I know their families are the most vocal motherfuckers in the world about Kaepernick. And you get this anger where you're like, of course they have the fucking ball. They don't have the lack of balls, because they never did anything that would make them close to that kind of vicious loss, a tragedy. You know what I mean? So they can say those things like, this is what these motherfuckers died for. I was like, I can't talk about that so easy, because it'll ruin my day every single time I fucking talk about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm like, losing somebody is, and so like that, I think that my friends believe me because they know my story, and they don't have to worry if, like, oh, you don't know what this motherfucker went through. So when you're saying that, you're saying it from, I don't want to talk about it. It makes me sad. And so like, that's why I was like, I have a problem with the people that propagate like that political merchandise. You're like, oh, and this is why we stand and kneel. And you motherfuckers.
Yeah.
Of course, it's easy for you to talk about that.
Yeah.
And my boys get that, so they get that same animosity where like the motherfuckers talking about Gold Star families and selling on fucking t-shirts. They have no fucking idea what it's like to. I talk to Gold Star families every single week, if not every day. Like they talk to me, you know, every other day, and because their boys are still in our lives, there's we don't forget them. We're the people that will be the reason that they talk to their kids so they knew who their dad was, because they never got to meet their dad, or they were too little to remember and stuff like that. And so it's like, it's not so easy for us to like delve into like the fucking ugliness of things, because you're like, I have to worry about what the Gold Star families who are on my social media will think of what I'm saying.
Sure.
So like I can't even delve into that because I love them. I don't want to hurt them. And but that's why I'm so glad they're so vocal, because I'm like, oh, the people, you'll remember that these Gold Star families were vocal because they understood that's what their son fought for. And so to summarize, I was just was wounded, and I was the rifle team leader. I was the first team leader in a plane of patrol. I was walking through a canal. The Marine, I always say the fire leader concept. For people, there's some Marine leaders that specifically talk about that now. The fire leader concept is in the Marine Corps, you have to lead from the front, because you have to show your guys that you're not afraid to die for the things that like you're asking them to do. They'll never ask you to do something that they're not already doing better than you. A squad leader and team leader, they're better than you in everything that they do, including especially Marine infantry officers. Those motherfuckers are Spartans, and if they're working hard in person, it's because while you were fucking sleeping, they were fucking climbing up mountains to make sure that they could beat you at everything that they did, so they could lead you effectively. You know what I mean? Because they want to be stronger than you, so they're not asking you to be stronger than an idea. They're asking you to be strong, at least as strong as they are. And so me and my squad leader were the first in the patrol behind an engineer, and everybody was like, why are the two leaders in the front? And I was like, because everybody was dying, and these little fucking boys were behind us. And if we went in the front, they would show them, why the fuck should they step up? Why the fuck should they be walking point? You know what I mean? If our fucking squad leaders and team leaders are too bitches to do it.
Yeah.
And it's like, and that's how you build real leadership, because whatever I'm asking you to do, I'm already doing it. So if I'm not asking you to fucking follow me, I'm not asking you to follow me from the bottom of the mountain. Yeah. I'm asking you to fucking keep up with me. Yeah. Like, hey, motherfucker, let's fucking do this shit from behind me. Yeah. I'm going to show you that I'm fearless, that my life I'm more willing to put on my life than yours. I'm trying to protect your life because I know about you. I know your fucking family. And that's why we lost so many leaders in my unit. You know what I mean? I lost my first team leader. I lost my first squad leader. I lost my platoon commander. And all the people that raised me in the Marine Corps, I'd say like a third of them died in combat. And so it's like, we lose leaders because we build leaders. And I mean, the attrition is high because you want everybody to have that mentality. But like, oh, you can only lead from the front. And like, why would you do that? Because then everybody has the capacity to lead, because they understand that the responsibility. And that's why I'm talking, if I talk about, I'm so grateful for the leaders that lost men that are still active duty to talk about the things they talk about now, because I'm like, people they teach officers, and I think that they also help veterans deal with that. You know what I mean? Like, even though they're still active duty, them talking about it really helps those people cope with that. So, hey, man, I was in charge of the company, all these motherfuckers, they passed away. But in the Marine Corps, they passed away because I was beside them. I was in front of them. I was leading them. Yeah, the missions I sent them on. I was, my company commander was on the patrol with me. But like the way it works in the Marine Corps is like they don't have any participation in patrol. You just want to observe, and that's good. You know what I mean? So like they were making the calls. My squad leader and I were making the calls, and so like that's why it's so good that they're talking about the things they talk about now, because it's important. If it helped me, it must have helped other people. And they're like, oh man, they have these emotions and they're still young and they still have the military career ahead of them. And I'm like, that's why I'm so grateful that I have access to Vietnam veterans, to Iraq, Afghanistan, where like, these motherfuckers are like the Sun Tzus and Miyamoto Musashis of our time. We're having access to them now. And people don't even realize that these are them of our time. But I'm like, if they're preaching resilience, they're living it, and one day, 200 years from now, we'll have been so grateful that the ones that lived are given the perspective as they give it, because at what other time would you get that? And like, I feel like all the people that pass away, you don't really appreciate them until later, until their books have the lens of this famous war or whatever. But the ones that are talking now are good leaders. So bro, I have to go. I'm sorry, Zoom just got reset.
No, dude, don't apologize. Zoom. Don't apologize. You gave me an hour and 45. Those dude, I could talk to you forever. I don't want to. Yeah, I feel like I can't. Like, I don't want to say some cheesy like "thank you for your service." So I just, I don't.
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk.
No, dude, thank you for doing this.
Because I understand that, like, now, like, I feel like I could have built a lot of animosity against different communities towards me, but I'm like, if anybody can take it, it's me and my people. So I'm like, I have to, because it's my community.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I feel like now I have to be more grateful for all the people that are patriots and veterans that still support me, because I'm like, because it's easy to kind of like interact with people that you disagree with. And I'm like, I know that my friends in my bubble, we have a lot of disagreements, and that is so the capacity to love one another with people from politically different spectrums is possible.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of tragedy, so you don't want to export that, but I think it is like, it always, I'll never, like, the irony of the fact that the motherfuckers that are the baddest, my best friends are literally killers, professional killers. The fact that they can be so willing to hear, it comes from them not having insecurity, the ego.
Yeah.
I feel like, oh man, yeah, guess what? I have, motherfuckers have confirmed kills. So like, I'm not worried about, oh, you said this, or like the threats or whatever.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
I'm glad that, for any opportunity now to speak on it, where it's just like nobody's paying me or lying or like that, like,
yeah,
the
dude, there's no fucking agenda here, man. Just get out, just dicks out, just say whatever you want. That's what I like, man. I don't want some talking. Hey, so we're gonna talk about these talking points, and we're gonna talk about this hashtag. Fuck that, man. You come on here with the Dragon Ball Z shirt, and it's just like, let's do this, bitch. Like,
no, exactly. I was like, oh man, the Marine Corps should be teaching classes off of anime, because the Japanese have a warrior culture. Like, they have, when you go to Japan, you understand why they're able to deal with the pandemic and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's of discipline.
Yeah.
And I was like, if people had, if Americans were more willing to introduce their kids to trauma of the way the Japanese are, they're like, hey, don't fucking do this shit, because this shit will fuck you up.
Yeah.
Watch fucking Naruto.
Yeah.
Oh my God, this could happen. You could be killed. And they're like, you get better kids whenever you don't lie to them about the, expose to them the truth of life early on.
Yeah.
That's a whole other topic.
Dude, dude, you have my number, I have your number. I would fucking love to have you on again, man. That was brilliant. I'm down for another rant. I loved it. That was brilliant.
Yeah, bro, just let me know. Share with me where this is going to be or whatever, and I don't know how to rip clips and stuff like that, but I'll just share it.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, no, it takes a couple hours to upload to YouTube because my internet sucks, but I'll send you a link this evening. And I didn't even realize till we were talking today, like, I'm very like impatient with guests when I'm like, are we on tomorrow? And I realize, like, as you're saying this, you're like, it's difficult to text. That's why you do voice message. So I apologize for yesterday. I was like, yo, Sebastian, are we on? I didn't even think. I'm like, oh, this motherfucker, it's okay.
No, I just started telling my own friends and family that because nobody knew that except for my little brother. My little brother knows. Yeah. Because like I don't like that. You don't want to give people your weaknesses.
Yeah. No. I'm
like, man, I'm not. That culture has to change.
You gotta. I was gonna say Mike Durant, the pilot shot down in Black Hawk Down, in his book In the Company of Heroes. I was so surprised because he openly talks about it's not some macho thing. He openly talks. He was in captivity for 13 days. He openly talks about like crying himself to sleep every night. He openly talks about just like always just being so sad and so scared. And it was such a good book because it's not like there I was planning to kill these motherfuckers. He's like, I'm thinking about like the kisses my 4-year-old son gives on my cheek. Like, I'm thinking about the two Cliff Walcott, the other pilot, or the died. He's like,
I hope you have some Vietnam veterans on. Maybe we'll connect, and I'll give you some Vietnam veterans.
Please.
That's so important because like people don't know like why I have such animosity and stuff like that. I was like, when I was in the Marine Corps, my dad told me about how things were. He didn't tell me until I was in the Marine Corps about how things were, but him telling me that he remembers crying in the jungle, after being drafted, missing his mom.
My uncle Tim.
I'm like, you when you're drafted, it's so different.
It's a different animal.
And you're pulled into a world that I'm like, you change so many people's perspective on you. You really fucked up a lot of kids. You know what I mean? A lot of people think like, oh, why Vietnam veterans? Are like, well, first of all, there's not a lot of Vietnam veterans because a lot of them died in combat.
Yeah, 56,000.
People don't understand the 10,000s of casualties that we had.
Yeah.
So because they didn't live. So they're well adjusted because so many of them died. They didn't live.
Yeah.
And that's what people don't understand when we look at the casualties. Like, it was 33 or something like that just in combat from the time we were there from certain campaigns, and are like
Vietnam deaths is 56,000 deaths.
56,000. So I'm trying to remember the specific campaigns because my dad was drafted late.
Yeah.
And whatever. But since he was drafted, you know what I mean? Like
Okay.
So the initial before they started drafting people, and to whatever the parts of the campaigns or whatever. I don't know the numbers exactly, but whenever when they started drafting people, and who was going to go to Vietnam versus, because there are people that were already in the military that weren't drafted, that they were, they trained everybody, and then the people that were drafted were a different. They looked down on them a little bit, you know what I mean? Because they were draftees, and it's that you should, it's just a different thing.
My uncle Tim passed away in 2013, but he was drafted, and he's. I mean, I never even heard these stories directly from him. I heard them indirectly through, people in my family that. What's up?
I'll connect you with some Vietnam
Please
veterans,
do.
because I think it's important, because I'm like, I don't even like telling my shit, because I'm like, man, I have family, if my views are on immigration and stuff like that, where I'm like, I have motherfuckers that were born in Mexico that were drafted. A lot of people don't even know that was possible, but that's just how that's why they don't know.
Yeah.
The way they don't understand how the way the draft works. We have an all volunteer service. I was like, no, I have deals that were drafted, and they were born in Mexico. And I was like, and they fought. You know what I mean? That's why we have Peraltas. And Master Sergeant Benavides. Yeah. My dad served Master Sergeant Benavides in the Green Berets, and you see, you have all these really, really cool histories, and I'm like people are like, why I do anything to Vietnam veterans say, oh, my dad. Right now, we'll never get this time because they're passing away. It's hard not to talk about that. In that lens, but they are passing away.
Yeah.
And so it's important for the history of our nation for their stories to be out now, because it makes me mad whenever I spend time with POWs and Vietnam veterans, and they have political views that are not being represented on social media. I'm like, you motherfuckers are talking like everybody has these different views. I know the baddest motherfuckers in the military, and they're regularly talking about. They have feelings about fucking draft officers.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my god, the fact that you see these T-shirt views, and then I'm like, one of my best friends is called the fucking Butcher, and he's a fucking double Purple Heart recipient, infantry Marine veteran. And I'll tell you what, he does not have these fucking fake ass. It's just funny, they're getting represented because they're not on social media. Yeah. And that's why I was like, you motherfuckers say a lot of it. It's they're my friends, so I can't. I can connect you guys.
Please do, Please do. What you saying about your dad? Yeah, my Uncle Tim, he was drafted, and I think he told my dad stories where he was like, he's like, I'm sitting there in the bed, and they're hanging from branches because tigers had been eating their friends. So they start hanging their beds from branches. And he's like, I remember falling asleep just sobbing, because I was like, why the fuck am I in Vietnam? I'm 19. I should be smoking pot in northern New Hampshire. I should be. Instead, it's my friend was eaten by a tiger yesterday. That's not hyperbole. His friend was eaten by a fucking tiger, and he's falling asleep on a tree branch in Vietnam.
Hopefully I'll get some of my friends this year.
Please
to
do.
Communicate where I'm friends with some people where they're out of 30 people, 18 people in their platoon died.
Yeah.
And I'm or one of them was only one survivor. I have friends that are here in San Antonio that are Hoist City veterans and Walking Dead veterans, and it's where the whole unit was completely annihilated and they lived.
Jesus.
And it's it gives you. That's why I say I'm so close with them, because they made me. Their injuries are not advanced in mine, but they were hated at a much higher level. It's I can fucking take a little bit of hate. These motherfuckers were spit on. You know what I mean? And they were dorks.
Yeah,
and they were spit on.
Baby
still.
killers, screamed at. Yeah, now it's just a couple mean hashtags. Like, all right, whatever, pussy. Like, they came back. Yeah, all their friends dead, maimed, and they came back and you had a bunch of hippies screaming like baby killers. And it's like, dude, I didn't even want to go. Like, I was at the same concerts with you guys. Like, you know, I should be in the back of a VW bus. Like, it's...
And that's what helps. I have to explain to people where I'm like, man, it makes me mad because, like, so many people came from poverty and they were drafted to be hated and they still survived. You know what I mean? And it's like, and it's... That's why the Vietnam veterans mean so much to me, because the networks that they laid are why people don't hate veterans as much, because they're like, we can't let this happen.
We can't let this fucking happen again. I know I'm keeping you way over your time, but I'll text you when it's up. It'll probably be like 3-4 hours from now. I'll text you. Let's definitely fucking do another one. And please put me in touch with some of your friends. I'd love to do them. And dude, thank you so much for doing it, man. That was changing. I don't want to give you some inspiration porn shit, but I needed that. I needed that. I needed this podcast.
I'm not good about telling people my shit because I can't type it. You know, and I just can't type it.
Yeah. Well, dude, you fucking tell an awesome story, so let's definitely do another one, man.
Yes, sir.
Sebastian, no, don't say sir to me, man. No, fuck that. I'm a bitch.
That's a Texas thing.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Not in the military.
Yeah. All right. Sebastian, thank you, sir, and stay safe, stay healthy. Hopefully, COVID doesn't kill us all, and
I gotta stay bad, motherfucker.
All right, dog. Take it easy.
You too.
Peace.